Luke McCaffrey's role might be bigger than you would expect from a third-round rookie, and Emmanuel Forbes' role might be less than you would expect from a second-year, first-round cornerback. That and more coming up on this Mailbag episode of Locked On Commanders.
You are Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into this episode of Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast covering the Washington Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget that you can subscribe for free on YouTube or wherever you're listening to this podcast. And you can continue this conversation with me by becoming a Locked On Commanders insider. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders. Sign up today to be an insider. And from there, you will get news, analysis, one-on-one conversations, all with me via text message. No hashtags, no apps, no filters. All you need is your phone, your text messages. You text me, I text you. A lot of cool conversations going on over there. So become a Locked On Commanders insider. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders today. I am David Harrison, credentialed member of the media, covering the Washington Commanders for CommanderGameDay.com. I'm here with you every Monday through Friday, along with our everydayers and everydayers. I appreciate your continued support for the show. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Win $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. On today's episode, we are going to be talking about the backup quarterback situation, win total projections coming from me and from our insiders, 2024 schedule considerations and conversations. But we are going to start off with a conversation about Luke McCaffrey, cornerback Emmanuel Forbes, and a little bit more on the impact potential of offensive coordinator Kliff Kingsbury in this Mailbag episode. And we're going to start off with Scott, insider Scott, who comes through and says, how special do you think Luke McCaffrey will be? And will we see him on the outside? Scott also followed up with asking about Emmanuel Forbes, how he's looking early. Do I think that he can be a viable #1 cornerback? We're going to start with the first round draft pick, Emmanuel Forbes. And the reason I want to do this is I want to rip the Band-Aid right off, guys. So for starters, you go back to when he was drafted, right? What was the big concern? Maybe a little bit overblown at first. It was his size. It was his weight. It was the rail thin frame, all of that stuff. We were all concerned about it. And if you remember, a lot of us were talking about how we were talking with Fred Smoot. Obviously, he knows a little bit, a thing or two about playing cornerback in the NFL. And the biggest thing, the famous, kind of the famous or now infamous saying that he brought up, right, was stakes and weights, right? You can get bigger, you can put on weight, you can eat more, you can eat better. When you're making NFL money, you can work out better when you're working in an NFL facility, getting NFL training, doing all that kind of stuff. Well, I'm here to tell you, Emmanuel Forbes does not look any bigger now than he did last year. Now, I don't think he necessarily looks smaller, and I know that some people actually do. I know I saw some people on Twitter talking about maybe he's like 150 pounds. Now, I think that's a little bit overblown, but I do think he looks pretty much the exact same size, which means that even with that NFL money, even with that NFL ability to eat better, hire a nutritionist maybe, get all those weights in, not have to worry about classes and tests and all that stuff. I mean, Emmanuel Forbes' body may just be what Emmanuel Forbes' body is. Now, the question is it going to really matter? Now, last year, obviously, there were some struggles in coverage and all those things. I don't know that his size necessarily showed up all of the time when it came to tackling. Certainly, there are some tackle situations where you could attribute to his size. Truthfully, a lot of cornerbacks aren't very good tacklers anyway. So how much of that is on his size and how much of that is just the fact that he's a cornerback and his job primarily is to defend the pass? I think we could kind of debate. I'd have to go through and try to break down every single tackle attempt that he had. But here's kind of some of the other reasons that you might not see as much out of Emmanuel Forbes this year as you would expect out of a second-year first-round draft pick. For starters, he was fielding punts with the special teams unit at the first OTA practice. Now, again, it's only been one OTA practice, so none of this stuff should be taken overly concerning. All those things. I mean, Jaden Daniels was the #2 quarterback at the first OTA practice. I think most of us, if not all of us, expect him to be starting when the season begins. So again, there's still a lot of time and things that are going to change. But obviously, if he's out there fielding punts, there's a reason for it. The coaching staff isn't just going to throw him out there for no stinking reason. Now, Jahan Dotson was also back there fielding punts. Doesn't mean that Jahan is going to be benched or, be the #3 or #4 wide receiver, anything like that. But so again, take it with a grain of salt, all that stuff. Jahan was also fielding punts a lot last year in practices, things like that. potentially just a way to get, one of your offensive weapons the ball a lot more. So there's that. But then there's also the fact that he wasn't on the field to start the practices, right? Like Michael Davis was out there getting number one reps. I know a lot of people have already kind of talked about that a little bit, but the bottom line is also, like, you can read into who was on the field first, but you could also read into the fact that they were rotating a lot of guys. Chigozie Anuzium, the undrafted free agent out of Colorado State, was in there against Terry McLaurin sometimes. Benjamin St. Juste out there. Quan was in the slot sometimes. He was at safety sometimes. Mike Sanders still was over on the second field with Jane Daniels and those guys, and I fully expect him to probably be the starting slot by the time we get to the regular season. So again, if you're asking me what the initial impressions are after one practice, that is the initial impression. Is obviously he's not necessarily coming in here as a solidified, written down in any type of solid form, anything better than light pencil as a starting cornerback on this team. We'll see how it develops over the course of training camp, over the course of the OTAs. Certainly we'll look for it at the next OTA practice here coming up next week on Wednesday. As for Luke McCaffrey, we kind of talked about this before the OTA practice. We kind of talked a bit after the rookie minicamp. I personally never expected Luke McCaffrey to be a slot guy only, just because when you're talking about this coaching staff and you're hearing all the messages they're delivering about putting these players in the best position possible to be successful, you can't really help but try to move a guy like Luke McCaffrey around the formation. And the really cool thing is watching him do some of those things, having the catch of the day in the first OTA practice in that end zone catch. If my memory serves me correctly, he was lined up outside on that rep. Regardless, he was lined up outside on several reps. Certainly was lined up in the slot as well. So do I think we're going to see him on the outside? Yeah, I do. I think we're going to see all of these guys. I think when you talk about the top receivers, Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson, Luke McCaffrey, I think you're going to see all three of them line up outside. You're going to see all three of them line up in the slot. And that takes us to our next question in the mailbag. David asks, do you think that Washington will keep 6 wide receivers? If so, who do you think will be the 6? So I think 6 receivers is realistic in the NFL today. I think most teams are going to bring 6 receivers in. I think this team especially really kind of needs to bring 6 receivers in because the amount of explosive plays they're going to try to get, the amount of running I expect them to do, not just on deep routes and things like that, but think about who your quarterback is. Jane Daniels is going to be extending plays. He's going to be scrambling himself, which means your receivers are going to be running routes and moving around on the field a lot more. You need to have guys on the roster that you can bring in and spell some of these guys every once in a while. So if I'm bringing 6 receivers in, I think Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson, Luke McCaffrey, obviously those 3 guys are going to get in again, unless they're just incredibly somehow terrible during training camp and all this stuff, which is not going to happen. And of course, barring injury, knock on wood, that doesn't happen. Those 3 guys, I think, are pretty much solidified. Now, these next 3 guys, I'm not necessarily going to name them in what I think is maybe depth chart order, right? But I'm going to talk about some of these guys. I think Olamide Zaccheaus has a pretty good shot at making this roster. For one, he's a good slot guy. He's got a lot of potential. This coaching staff brought him in this offseason for a reason. Like, they didn't really wait a long time to bring him in. Brian Johnson knows him really well. So I think that he's here for a reason. So I think Olamide Zaccheaus is going to stick around, making number 4. Jamison Crowder is another one I think is going to stick around. For one, he's a veteran. For number 2, to be quite honest with you, he's kind of easily replaceable next year in the draft if you go through, or in free agency if you go get a young punt return, specialist and things like that, or you continue to develop Kaz Allen on the practice squad, or Kaz Allen makes strides this year, maybe potentially he can come in. Did see Kaz Allen bobble a couple of punt returns there at OTAs in day 1. Now, it was raining, so a little bit of a grain of salt, but obviously you want to see Kaz clean that up. And then I think the last one right now I would project at this point in time in the process would be De'Ami Brown. I think De'Ami Brown brings enough versatility on the field as far as a deep ball threat. He's a little bit of a bigger body type of receiver, doesn't have really a lot of special teams contributions ability. But I think when you look at the roster, Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson, Luke McCaffrey, Olamide Zaccheaus, Jamison Crowder, you got a good amount of short area quickness, downfield ability, and in a little bit of a size deficit. De'Ami Brown, not the biggest receiver in the world, but I think when you look at kind of when you look at those 5, what could you use? A little bit of a bigger body, a little bit of a stronger guy. Again, De'Ami Brown's not a big receiver. When you look at the rest of the guys, Mitchell Tinsley certainly could be kind of that guy. Bryson Tremaine certainly has the size, but I don't know that right now I would put them above De'Ami Brown in the development standpoint. So that right now, that would be my 6 if we do have 6. And I do see the Commanders certainly a pathway to bringing 6 receivers in. Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson, Luke McCaffrey, Olamide Zaccheaus, Jamison Crowder, De'Ami Brown. But we got a long time before the roster is solidified. so we can see what the Washington Commanders roster is really going to look like. But we're also going to look a little bit more into the schedule that was released this week. That's coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's winner take all time in the NBA and the NHL, and FanDuel is going to give you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers, you can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. If you follow me on Twitter and you pay attention, I said a few days ago that the Denver Nuggets were probably going to win their series in 7 games, which means game 6 that happened on Thursday night, the Nuggets were up 3-2. It was an elimination game. If you follow what I was saying, then you knew the Minnesota Timberwolves were probably going to win that game. And not only did they win that game, they beat the brakes off the Denver Nuggets. Anthony Edwards and those guys doing their thing, drawing a game 7 against the defending NBA champions. That will go down Sunday at 8:30 p.m. Right now, the Denver Nuggets are the early favorites to win that game by 4.5 points. And the Denver Nuggets are still one of the top favorites to win the NBA Finals with plus 350 odds. Minnesota Timberwolves currently sitting at plus 850. Now, I'm not saying I know everything, but if I'm right about this one, the game, I picked the Denver Nuggets to win game 7. But even if the Denver Nuggets don't win, I did say previously that the winner of this series, I'm going to put money on to win the NBA Finals. So if the Timberwolves and Ant-Man can pull off that upset, you know where I'm going to be going for the NBA Finals. Wherever you want to go, visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Thanks again for making Locked On Commanders your first listen or your first view today and every day, everydayers. Thanks for coming through. Make sure you come back on Monday. We'll have a whole new episode of Locked On Commanders. In the meantime, if you're watching Fox Sports and ESPN on your television all day, realizing you got to turn down the volume when all the shouting begins, make the switch over to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every single day to bring you the biggest stories without all of the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Guarantee you that they talked about the Nuggets getting whooped by the Minnesota Timberwolves on Lost here on Friday. So continuing our mailbag episode here, Jamal came through. Jamal said, I'm listening to Monday's show, and I'm curious to know if you feel the DBs and LBs, linebackers, will benefit from practicing against a Kliff Kingsbury offense and what some of those benefits might be compared to previous Washington coaches. Yeah, so I think that, yes, obviously, I'm going to say that I think that this defense is going to benefit from coaching or from practicing against Kliff Kingsbury. For starters, I think Kliff Kingsbury is just going to be a lot better at giving them looks that they're, potentially going to see against opponents. And I don't necessarily mean scout team type stuff, but I just mean the way that the NFL is going today. Today's NFL is a passing league. Today's NFL is a high-flying league. It is a mobile quarterback league, and that is everything that you expect out of a Kliff Kingsbury offense. Also, however, you're going to see some really good run blocking, and I think you're going to see a lot of energy from this Washington Commanders offensive line. Don't know how good they're going to be yet, but I think they're going to be very aggressive. Nick Allegretti actually really stood out from practice. The left guard addition from the Kansas City Chiefs this offseason free agency, just kind of screaming around the field and running around. Just a high-energy dude. Really stood out just for his energy. And some parts of it, his energy stood out. They're doing field goal drills. You know what I mean? So kind of an area that's not really a lot of energy for the offensive line specifically anyway, but still very high energy guy. So I think they're going to get a lot of benefit from it, but I think they're also going to get benefit, like I said, from practicing against Marcus Mariota, practicing against Jaden Daniels. When you look at the schedule of quarterbacks that this Washington Commanders defense is going to face, Daniel Jones, Kyler Murray, Deshaun Watson, Lamar Jackson, Bryce Young, Caleb Williams, Russell Wilson, kind of still, Justin Fields maybe, Jalen Hurts, all of those guys can move, and they move really well, and all of those guys will use their movement as a weapon when available and when possible. The closest thing to an immobile quarterback that this Washington Commanders defense is going to face this year is Joe Burrow. Maybe I think he can move better than people expect, but with all those injuries that he's kind of piling up, I don't know that he's going to be doing that as much. Baker Mayfield, I think, can move better than a lot of people expect, but he doesn't do it as much as some of these other guys do. So maybe those are the closest. But even those two guys, like 15 years ago, those two guys would be considered special athletes at the quarterback position compared to the guys that they would be playing around. So it just kind of shows you where the league has gone today. So simply practicing against Marcus Mariota, practicing against Jaden Daniels certainly is going to help. And then also having a coordinator who's going to be trying a lot of different things. He's going to try to misdirect you. He's going to try to play with your eyes, do all those things. I think it'll help the discipline of the Washington Commanders defense. So yes, I do think practicing against Kliff Kingsbury's offense is going to have a positive effect on the Washington Commanders defense. Moving on to Aaron now. Aaron said, after your initial thoughts, what do you think our record is going to be? So I don't want to do a game by game specific win-loss projection here, but I will tell you that I think right now the Washington Commanders, I project them at 6-11 here. And I try to be a little bit conservative on these things. And I kind of hesitate a little bit because this time last year, I was telling you guys that the Washington Commanders might win 4 games and might win 14 games, but it's going to be a lot of fun to watch. And I think certainly from a football purist standpoint, there were a lot of fun things to watch happen. It was definitely, I say fun, not in an enjoyable way, but fun from an analytical standpoint. Like if you love analyzing the game, if you love really breaking down what's going on, sometimes that means there's some head scratching moments, maybe a lot of head scratching moments. It's something that certainly engaged the brain is basically the best way to say that. But when I said 4 games or 14 games, I didn't realize that my floor was actually the ceiling for this Washington Commanders team. In the first 4 of the games, again, at Tampa versus New York, at Cincinnati, at Arizona, I think that, a 2-2 split there is probably advantageous, is probably realistic. Then we get to the best part of the year, week 5 to 14. Washington's only going to have to travel to Baltimore, New York, and Philly. That's incredibly advantageous from a travel schedule standpoint. But like I said, I like to keep it conservative. So I think you get 3 wins in that stretch, likely coming from a combination of the Carolina Panthers, Chicago Bears, Pittsburgh Steelers, and Tennessee Titans. So that's 4 opponents. I think you probably get 3 wins in that stretch. Me personally, so right now that's 5-8 going into the bye. And then you have your final 4 games. You're at NOLA, at Dallas. Then you're home against Philly and Atlanta, not in that order, but just 2 road games, 2 home games. I think if you get 2 wins there, you feel pretty good, but I think you're likely probably going to get 1 win there, especially if Atlanta turns out to be what a lot of people outside looking in think Atlanta could be this year. Then I think 6-11 is probably a realistic place to start right now. Again, we've only seen 1 OTA practice, so we've got a lot more to learn about this team. So that number may go up. Honestly, that number may also go down depending on how all this stuff comes together. Trevor came through, said, so I feel like the NFL has built itself around divisional rivalries, right? So if they want to continue to emphasize the importance of divisions as well as eliminating meaningless late season games, wouldn't it be logical to play all your divisional opponents weeks 1 through 3, and then again in weeks 16 through 18? It emphasizes starting the season strong and finishing the season strong, and it minimizes the luck of the injury. Trevor, I get your point greatly, but I think the NFL is more so, I think the move to solidify divisional opponents the last week of every single NFL season, and I think twice in the last 4 weeks of every single NFL season, certainly was geared towards making those last few games more important, trying to force teams to put their starters on the field. I think there was just too many times where the NFL regular season ended with starters sitting on the bench, and the NFL wanted to find a way to get rid of that. So that's why they did that. As far as having divisional rivalries cemented in the beginning, because you do sometimes get early divisional opponents and all that stuff. So it's not like it never happens. I think the reason the NFL will never make that happen as a every year occurrence is because, let's be honest, what are they interested in actually doing? They want to keep your attention all year long. And think about this. If your team is 1-4 going into a division rivalry game, how much do you care about that game? You still care about that game. If your team is 1-4 going up into a game against the Los Angeles Chargers, if you're a Commanders fan, how much do you care about that game? Not as much. So the NFL knows in the early part of the season, they're going to have your attention because you're starving for football. You want to see these rookies. You want to see these free agents, these new schemes. You want to see all of this stuff in action. They have you the first 3-4 weeks of the season. They got you. They don't have to worry about really enticing you. They don't really need to worry about keeping you on the hook. It's that middle part of the season, especially for your teams that are bad. You're 1-4 teams. You're 1-6 teams. Where do we get juice out of those teams? I think that's part of the reason you see the Chicago Bears and Washington Commanders in week 8, because if both these teams are bad, they're still hoping there's going to be a little bit of juice in that number 1 versus number 2 matchup. And maybe Bryce Young and CJ Stroud showed them evidence last year that that's real. So they went ahead and did that. And then also you get those divisional matchups kind of later in there. And I think that's just why the NFL does it that way, because they want to try to keep your attention all year long. And they know, like I said, in the beginning of the season, they're going to have your attention because everybody just wants to watch football. It's that middle part of the season where they really need to focus on keeping your attention. And then, like we just talked about, the end of the year, making sure that those divisional matchups round out the year, just making sure that you stick through into the playoffs. So good question there. That's my personal opinion on it. Could be wrong, but that's why I don't think the NFL will ever make it mandated that you have to start the season against division rivals, because again, we're all going to watch it. Like Commanders Chargers week 1, you're going to watch it. If you're a Commanders fan, if you're a Chargers fan, you are going to watch that game and you are going to love every second of it. 2 more questions around now the mailbag episode today. We'll get to that coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or dive vehicle alive. eBay Motors knows that. Today's episode of Locked On Commanders is brought to you by eBay Motors, and eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle or even level it up to peak performance. For superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're looking for more speed in your vehicle, more power out of your vehicle, or more style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die vehicle, you're always going to find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's guaranteed fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back, because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need and the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. So keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay's guaranteed fit is only available to U.S. customers. Wrapping up this mailbag episode of Locked On Commanders. Thanks again for making Locked On Commanders your first listen, your first view today and every day. Tia came through, said, how do the vets look interacting with the rookies? Is the atmosphere different from the Dan Snyder era around this time of year? Yes, 1,000%. Yes, the environment is incredibly different, completely different. I wrote something for Commander Game Day just before I laid down this episode, talking about the excitement in the air, the buzz around the facility. It is real at every single level. I mean, you talk to equipment guys and they feel it. You talk to the team in-house media, they feel it. Coaches feel it. Players feel it. The energy is incredibly different. As far as the veterans and the rookies, I'll tell you right now, you could not have sat there if you didn't know who all these players were, right? And you just looked at the field, you would not be able to point and say, that's a rookie, that's a vet, that's a vet, that's a rookie, that's a returning guy, that's a new vet, that's an old vet, that's a new vet. You wouldn't be able to do it. The team looked like a team. They were in unison. They were working together. And I think that's very good and just kind of shows the professionalism of these guys, because they're certainly still getting to know each other, right? Like they don't all know each other quite yet. So that's still a work in progress. But what you have is you've got 90 or so guys who are just locked in, working the same direction, doing the same thing. So I think you love to see it. I mean, honestly, for me personally, I'm super excited that a rookie receiver had the catch of the day at OTA practice number 1. I don't want to make too big of a deal of it. I don't want to oversell it, right? But I think when you look at all the veterans on this team, you look at the stars like Terry McLaurin, the first round picks like Jahan Dotson, the fact that Luke McCaffrey makes the first best catch of the practice season, I think it just speaks really highly for the team. And it came from Jeff Driscoll as well. So again, don't want to oversell it, don't want to overblow it, right? But I personally was very happy to see that it was a rookie, Luke McCaffrey, coming away with that. And if you watch the tape, he goes and he celebrates with Zach Ertz. So you got third round rookie celebrating with a vet who is a new member of the team, but one of the oldest players on the team. So you literally got past and present, combining there in the celebration. So, what's not to love there? Merle came through and asked, are Marcus Mariota and Jeff Driscoll in competition to be the backup quarterback? So Merle, I'm going to tell you right now, the team's official stance there isn't one right now on this whole conversation, but to me, Marcus Mariota is number 2. The competition for backup quarterback is number 3. And I don't know if the Washington Commanders are going to bring 3 quarterbacks on the active roster. I believe they probably will, to be quite honest with you. I think that's kind of a trend that the NFL is going through as well. So I think the competition, if there is one there, would be Jeff Driscoll and Sam Hartman for that number 3 quarterback position. Again, Sam Hartman had a lot of suitors, so I just kind of feel like Sam Hartman's probably going to end up being your 3rd. I think Jeff Driscoll, because of the veteran practice squad rules, might be retained on the practice squad. So I think at the end of the day, your quarterback depth chart, Jaden Daniels, Marcus Mariota, Sam Hartman, Jeff Driscoll. Could be wrong. Maybe the market for Sam Hartman isn't that great, or he's just dedicated enough and says, guys, put me on the practice squad. I'm not going to sign with another team. I'm fine. And they put him on the practice squad. That's certainly possible as well. So getting to more win-loss projections. I gave you guys mine already, my way too early win-loss projection, 6 wins right now. I like to be conservative. So that's where I went through. pulled the insiders and did the averages. The averages come out to 8 wins, according to the insiders. Did have one friend getting a little bit bold there with 11 wins. I like the confidence there. Don't hate that at all. Michael also came through a little bit confident. He predicted 9-8, but predicted 2-0 against the Dallas Cowboys. Says he doesn't think the Dallas Cowboys are making the playoffs this year. That would be very, very interesting. And I'll tell you right now, if the Washington Commanders and Jaden Daniels and Dan Quinn can beat the Dallas Cowboys twice, including on the road in Week 18, to keep the Cowboys out of the playoffs, you guys, we guys, all of us guys, are going to be very excited for what's to come in 2025. So great mailbag episode. As always, insiders, Commanders fans, bringing the heat on those questions. Really appreciate all of that. Come back on Monday. We'll have a brand new episode of Locked On Commanders. In the meantime, if you got questions, comments, throw them in the YouTube comment section or text me directly by becoming a Locked On Commanders insider at joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders. Don't forget to check out Locked On Sports Day, the first ever 24/7 live streaming sports channel on YouTube. And as always, thank you so much for making Locked On Commanders your first listen or your first view today and every day. Everydayers, thanks for coming through on a regular basis like you do. Until we speak again, if you're out and about, please be safe, be kind. I'll see you next time for another episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.